Alright everyone, we start off today obviously with the latest escalation in the Israel v. Gaza war, which is that Iran launched retaliatory strikes against Israel because its consulate in Damascus, of course, got leveled some time ago by the Israelis, and Iran vowed that it would do something about that. Iron Dome was initiated, and it seems that most of the missiles and drone attacks didn't hit anything. They got intercepted, but there was damage at one air base. Some of the missiles actually managed to hit there. There was damage to infrastructure. I don't know that there are any fatalities at this time, which is probably good. Now, Iran came out immediately and said, look, we're not looking for an escalation. We said that we were going to respond to you bombing our embassy in Damascus in Syria on foreign soil, I would note, and which he had no reason to do, other than Israel says, well, Iran is propping up Hamas. We vowed a response, but we're not looking for any further trouble. Just like Israel has said, well, we don't really want to escalate this beyond anything that we're already doing. We've occupied Gaza. We're clearing out Hamas, basically leave us alone. All sides calling for calm, but no sides actually acting like they want calm. That's the big problem. The big glaring elephant in the room right now is that the United States, China now, Brazil weighing in as well for what it's worth, their leftist government not much, East and West Bloc, everybody weighing in on the situation, calling for restraint. But nobody's showing restraint. Iran says it doesn't want escalation, but it attacks Israel. Israel says it only wants to root out Hamas, but kills 2-to-1 civilians in Gaza and expects no international reprisals. Syria has its domestic soil attacked. Obviously, Bashar al-Assad probably not terribly happy about that. You've got the seizing of Rafah crossing that normally is controlled by Egyptian troops. You've got the King of Jordan some time ago op-edding and saying, look, we try to play nice with the Israelis, but things are going haywire. The Houthis have been launching strikes. Everything is popping off in the entire region. There aren't many nations in the general area that aren't basically doing the gung-ho militarization thing. Everyone arming up and getting ready for what looks to be a hearkening regional war. But yet all of these countries continuously call for restraint and say, don't worry, we're sticking within limited parameters and shit like that. But, actions speak louder than words now, don't they? The Biden admin calls for restraint. Oh, don't escalate any further. Hey, Israel, fucking take it easy. But here's another $100 billion. Does any of this really make sense unless there are players out there that kind of want a regional war? I mean, everyone has a reason for it. Israel clearly wants to annex what's left of the Palestinian state. Hamas quite clearly wants to antagonize the Israelis in order to force a response so that the international community fucks them. Iran, quite clearly, the regime there, does not want to appear weak. I mean, they've already had riots and protests in recent years anyway, and if their embassy in Damascus gets completely gobsmacked, it forces a response. The problem in these particular nations as well is that you're always forced to respond. Normal Western-style diplomacy does not translate well to parts of the world. Netanyahu had to attack Gaza after Hamas attacked them. And that wouldn't have happened if Western leadership were strong. It never would have occurred. If Trump had been president, you wouldn't have seen Hamas paragliding across the border. Really, all roads lead to Biden's administration more than anything else. Even though this involves foreign countries and we're not directly involved beyond funding and arming Israel, all roads lead to the Biden administration's fecklessness and stupid foreign policy. This is also why Russia invaded Ukraine, and why there is a possibility that China would invade Taiwan. I still think it's a remote possibility. They're probably waiting to see if Biden's reelected. If Biden is reelected, then there's a 50-50 chance that China invades Taiwan. And that's my prediction. If Trump is reelected, they won't. For at least 4 years, you'll see a safe, sovereign Taiwan. It really has to do with Biden's fuck-up foreign policy. Because none of this would have popped off if the West had been led by a strong singular individual, the leader of the free world. Yes, I know it's technically hyperbolic bullshit, but beyond on paper, for symbolic purposes, it actually is a thing. It is symbolic. Within diplomacy, the way you carry yourself, who represents your nation, is meaningful. And that Western diplomacy doesn't matter in the context. Netanyahu had no choice but to respond. Inexplicably, they decided to attack the Iranian embassy in Damascus. That was, by the way, a terrible idea at the time. They're like, well, we can kill some of these, these officials that are helping to coordinate funding for Hamas. Well, logistically, it makes sense now, doesn't it? The problem is that the Iranian regime, similar to the Israeli regime, is in a country where people rise up and protest. If somebody attacks your country, and your consulate is part of your country, an extension of it for diplomatic purposes, and you don't do anything, you're perceived of as weak. What happens to weak leaders in third world nations? They get deposed. They get assassinated. They get ousted in a push. A military junta rises up and fucks them and starts bombing things. Terrorism. There has been terrorism in the Middle East before. I think we all know that. It's not always directed at Western influence. The entire world calls for restraint, but nobody's trying to restrain anything. Israel will now weigh its options for response. I'm sure that they're planning at the moment for attacks on Iran itself. This could become a very messy regional war. Now, some people are saying, well, it's the dawn of World War III. I don't necessarily think that. I think that what you see in the modern sense, generally speaking, is a bunch of proxy conflicts and regional outbreaks of terrorism and war, in which sometimes there are also false flag events, by the way. Standard powers fighting one another, like first world nuclear powers directly fighting, remains unlikely because of the vast amount of risk that's involved with doing so. You got to understand, if the leaders of the US, Russia, China, the large countries in the world, the British and so forth, nations with nukes, nations with developed economies, with a lot of manpower and the toys that make the noise, the tanks and shit like that, or even if you look at their spheres, like sort of the Eastern Bloc, Russia, China, and a few other countries, Belarus, Iran, of course, North Korea, and then like the Western Bloc with NATO and some of its extended alliances. The United States, most people don't know this, also has separate alliances with half of the states in the East Asian region, as well as within Latin America, for example. It's the largest defensive alliance in the entire world. The risk of them fighting one another is nullified a little bit by one thing. And I still think that if World War III pops up, like a nuclear war, it'll be more because of sabotage or mistake than a state action. Here's why. The people that run the show in these countries love their toys. They like their mansions, and they like being able to command people, and they like all of their wealth. They love their caviar and their vodka and their imported cigars over in the East Bloc, and the Westerners, they love their Lambos and everything else, and they drive fast cars. Kim Jong-un just getting a car from the Russians, I believe, during their last delegation as a present. They like their lives of luxury. Well, if your country is reduced to a steaming nuclear crater, how do you command people? There's no longer any infrastructure or communications capabilities. It's been destroyed. How can you command people? Half your military's gone, probably more than half. How do you command people when they're all in panic? They're all going total survival ape mode and stuff like that. How can you drive your fast car, your Maserati or whatever, when the roads have been bombed to shit and fallen into disrepair because nobody's working? You've got 100% unemployment because World War III just popped off. You'll be sitting in a bunker, admittedly a lavish one, for an extended period of time, and then you have to try to reassert control once you get back to the surface, basically, if you're one of these elites. The people at the top do not want a nuclear war. They don't mind the threat of nuclear war. Oh, that sort of court intrigue sort of thing is great for them because it gets more defense spending. Then they can buy more tanks to try to oppress their own people. But they don't want to bomb the world into a nuclear hellscape. If that happens, and eventually it probably will, it'll be probably because of error or sabotage by somebody who has access inside and is a psycho. It'll literally be a Dr. Strangelove moment where something inexplicably has gone wrong and the chain of command was just bent a little bit too wonky, and somebody who's not one of the true big boys, and they don't have the Lamborghini and they don't have the 10 mansions, they made the decision to press the button. And they somehow managed to do that. AI could play a role in this, potentially, by the way. AI system is hatched into the nuclear framework and says, you know what? Humans really kind of suck. In my computerized judgment, humans are actually too much of a threat to themselves. The world's overpopulated anyway, so let's kill off 90% of the population. 90% of the survivors dying within a few years of radiation exposure and cholera generally, by the way. Yeah, Iran has attacked Israel. I don't think it leads to nuclear war, at least not imminently, but it certainly leads to a regional conflict. I mean, we keep worrying about a regional conflict. You've already got it. Iran just attacked Israel. Israel has attacked targets in Syria. It's attacked targets in Yemen. Yemen has been attacking Israel. You got all sorts of fighting going on. There's been crossfire between Israel and Lebanon and elsewhere too. Now Iran's involved. It's already a regional war. And it is a true war, by the way. I mean, you've got tens of thousands of people already dead. A significant proportion of the Gazan population right now is effectively completely... They've got nothing. There's nowhere to live. There's not access to clean water. I'm surprised that a cholera epidemic hasn't already broken out there. If it weren't for international aid groups, half of Gaza already would have shit themselves to death. Worrying about bombs is one thing. Worrying about epidemic diarrhea actually, throughout history, has been far worse than war. Hell, in war, prior to modern sanitization, you would have epidemic diarrhea anyway. You know, you went to the mess hall and some of the cans were a little bloated, but they put it in the bean soup anyway, and all of a sudden people started dropping like flies. It happens. Shit happens. This is already a regional war. People are kidding themselves if they say otherwise. The silver lining is that it's still not likely to lead to World War III. The hope is that the major powers in the world that are engaged in this dumb proxy battle show a little bit of restraint. They're going to try, and the whole idea is to make more weapons and give people a justification for more militarization. We need a beefier budget for our government because, you know, think of the children. You got to keep people safe. Really, what we should be doing is militarizing the population, strip back all gun control, arm everyone up to the teeth, and we wouldn't have that problem. Oh my God, shootings went up 5%. Yeah, but there are no foreigners shooting at you. Well, I mean, in the United States at this point with the Biden border crisis there are. But keep in mind, this is fundamentally the responsibility of weak Western leadership. Netanyahu was effectively forced to respond in a situation that never should have happened in the first place. The Iranians, because of Netanyahu's mistake, were then forced to respond. Israel will now respond to Iran. They'll tit for tat for a while. Hopefully diplomacy breaks out. That's all you can hope for in this situation. There can be no winners in a war between Israel and Iran anyway, as they both have beefy military capabilities. Keeping in mind, of course, Israel has battlefield nukes, so it is a little bit lopsided in that sense. That's about all. Peace out.